Welcome to According to Sam, folks. This is episode 324. Thank you for joining me. This is going to be my only podcast this week. Won't be here on Friday, but I will be back a week from today on Monday. I have a really good podcast for you today. Going to try to get to everything and still talking about the big win of the Democratic Socialists, Muslim 33-year-old Zoran Mamdani, and the surprise and the amount of people that seem to be shocked by what's going on in the Democratic Party, because this is bigger than Zoran Mamdani. This is, like we said in the last podcast, this has been something festering in the Democratic Party going back to 2016, Bernie Sanders' run and the platform and message that he was running on back in 2016. But even before that, the Occupy Wall Street movement, which led into the run of Bernie Sanders in 2016 for over a decade now. This has been something that has been festering in the Democratic Party for longer than over a decade, but it's been a real issue where the Democratic Socialist movement has been growing, and there's been more of an appetite for the message of democratic socialism. So how did we get here? And again, this is bigger than Zoran Mamdani. How did we get here is the question that I want to ask today. I saw this video on X, and it was talking about the decade of the 1980s and how great the decade of the 1980s were. If you didn't live during the decade of the 80s, they were great. I say all the time that I believe that being a Gen Xer and growing up in the 80s and the 90s and understanding history as I do, understand human history very well. I love studying history, understand the what human history was like before the United States of America, the feudal system in Europe, slavery all over the world, and dictators and monarchs. I understand what human history has been like for thousands of years before the United States. And I can also see where human history is going in the future. We are less free today than we were back in the 1980s and 90s. We enjoy fewer privileges than we did back in the 80s and the 90s. And I feel that period of time, those 2 decades, were a sweet spot for human history. If you look at what human history was like in the past before the United States, and you look at the direction that human history is going, if you grew up and you got to experience the 1980s and the 90s here in the United States, it was, as I say often, Pax Americana. It was a short-lived Pax Americana, but it was Pax Americana. I want you to take a listen and look at this clip. This breakdown of what it was like to live in the 1980s.
The 1980s in America, when the dream felt real. This wasn't just nostalgia. It was power, pride, and prosperity. Gas, less than $1 a gallon. You could fill up your tank, grab a Coke, and still have change from a 5. Factories were booming. Jobs were everywhere. People were buying homes, cars, TVs, and living like it mattered. The economy was strong. The middle class was rising. Hard work actually paid off, and people believed in their future. American brands dominated the world. Ford, Levi's, underlies, IBM, Nike. You didn't have to explain what made in the USA meant. It spoke for itself. And the culture? Rock was loud, movies were bold, and everyone had a Walkman. Arcades were full, malls were packed. Life moved with confidence. It was a time when flying felt glamorous, shopping felt exciting, and the whole country had momentum. America didn't just survive the 80s, it flexed, it produced, it innovated, it led. Those were the times when the United States dictated style, fashion, music, and the rhythm of the entire world. If you wanted something, you just started, and everyone believed that everything would work out. Were the 80s the last great American decade? Tell us in the comments.
No, the 80s were not the last American decade. I believe that this carried on into the into the 90s, but after we enter into the year 2000 and then 2001 is when we start to experience major decline. And I'm not going to get into why that happens in this podcast, but I will be doing a podcast here in the near future talking about the transition from peace and prosperity to endless war and massive debt that took place in the first decade of the 2000s. But, again, as they say in this clip, that it was all about confidence and it wasn't great for everyone, and Reaganomics wasn't great for everyone. There were people, poor people that were still there in the 80s, but the potential for upward mobility was it was a lot more. It seemed to be a lot more accessible in the 1980s and the 1990s, that you could achieve anything, that you were born poor, but that didn't mean that you had to die poor, that the situation of your birth is not your final destiny, that you could create your own destiny, and all of these things that people believed in the American dream, that they could achieve the American dream. And there was so much confidence in America and what America was and what it meant to be American back in this time in the 1980s. You could have never sold communism in the 1980s and in the 1990s. If there was someone like Zoran Mondani running for public office in the 1980s, they would have ran him straight out of town, out of this country, tarred and feathered. His message never would have resonated in the 1980s. Why? Because of the air of potential that everyone had, and the fact that we had a thriving middle class, and that, like, again, everything wasn't perfect, but people had hope in the future. They had hope in what they could become and what they could do if they just put in a little hard work. You would have never been able to sell the communist message, democratic socialists. Sorry. You would have never been able to sell the democratic socialist message back in the 80s and the 90s. But now something has changed, and that is why the message is more appealing. That's why it is more prevalent, and that's why we're dealing with clowns like Zoran Mondani, and he's not the only one. Again, this is bigger than him. This isn't only about him. This is about a festering problem that has been going on for decades now, and he is just the latest symptom of that problem. National pride. This is a new Gallup poll that just came out this week as the nation approaches its 249th birthday coming up this weekend. This Gallup poll, national pride is declining in America, and it's splitting by party lines. New Gallup poll shows. The poll just came out yesterday. Only 36% of Democrats, and it says here that it splits beyond party lines. I mean, for Republicans, national pride has gone up a little bit, but because of Democrats and independents, their national pride going down, that has brought down the average. But only 36% of Democrats say they are extremely or very proud to be American, according to new Gallup poll reflecting a dramatic decline in national pride that is also clear among young people. That young people don't have any pride in being Americans anymore. They don't have the same confidence and the same hope for the future that we had back in the 1980s and the 1990s, that young people don't have any national pride. They're also more pessimistic and nihilistic about the future. This is what's going on. How did we get here? And in an environment like this, communism, democratic socialism is more appealing in a situation like we're dealing with now, where the middle class has been hollowed out. There's more inequality. There's more people struggling to survive. This Mondani guy ran on affordability and how people can't afford to rent apartments. They can't even afford to do anything now, that people are struggling. And that's what he ran on. And it resonated. It would have never, his message would have never resonated back in the 1980s and the 1990s, but it resonates now. $37 trillion in debt. $37 trillion in debt is where we are today. Again, Mondani's message of democratic socialism, Bernie Sanders, AOC's message of democratic socialism, it takes root. It is resonating more today because we're in such great debt. We have such a fiscal crisis. It is so hard to get by. Everything is more expensive. So yes, the message of democratic socialism, communism, is resonating. It is finding a home on the left in the Democratic Party, and that shouldn't surprise anyone. Go right here to Time Machine. What was the national debt in 1980? Less than $1 trillion. On this day in 1980, the national debt was less than $1 trillion. What about 1990? 10 years later. 10 years later, the national debt was $3 trillion. In 1990, on this day in 1990. What about in 2000? So in 1990, the national debt was $3 trillion. On this day in 1990, on this day in 2000, it only added $2 trillion to the national debt. It was $5 trillion. It is $37 trillion today. This is how fast the national debt is growing and how fast we're adding $1 trillion to the national debt. Where from 96 to 2002, it took 7 years to add $1 trillion to the national debt. Now we're adding $1 trillion to the national debt every 90 to 120 days. We just tripped over to 37 trillion. And they're getting ready to raise the debt ceiling if Trump gets this big, beautiful bill passed. And there's tons of problems with this bill. There's a lot of good things in this bill that I like about it, but there's tons of problems in this bill. And the bill does not address this issue. The biggest national security risk that we have is this debt. And the big, beautiful bill does not address that. They're saying that, that we're going to grow out of this. I don't see that happening. And in a situation like we're dealing with debt like this, in an economic environment where we're dealing with the hollowed out middle class, the middle class is evaporating. We have huge wealth inequality. This is a second gilded age. In an environment like this, the message of communism, democratic socialism, the message resonates. It is finding a home. This is how we got here, and it's bigger than Mondani. It's not just Mondani. This is the current mayor of our second largest city. So this is Karen Bass, one of her many trips to Cuba, and she's down in Cuba organizing with this group that she used to go down to Cuba with, the Venceremos Brigade. And Karen Bass is a communist. She is the mayor of our second largest city on the West Coast, and she's a communist. If Mondani wins, and I said in the last podcast, I don't think that he's going to win, but I've been listening to some people, and I've been reading some stuff where I think that his chances of winning are greater than I thought when I did the podcast on Friday. This guy is very likely going to be the next mayor of the United States' largest city, but he won't even be the first communist to be mayor of New York City. De Blasio was a communist, Democratic Socialist. And listen, I'm not going to do this anymore. Communism and socialism is the same thing. There's nothing different between communism and socialism. Let's go back to my man here who we listened to in the last podcast. This is the guy who gives the street interview in Karen Bass's Los Angeles a few weeks ago when they were rioting over the ICE raids. And we listened to him in the last podcast. But I want you to listen how he speaks of communism and socialism interchangeably. So to this guy, he doesn't see any difference between communism and socialism. Listen to him again.
We don't agree with the term illegal. We're undocumented. We've been here for thousands of years before you guys showed up, screwed up everything. We think we should organize together with the U.S. working class and fight together and create a better system. We're anti-capitalist. We think socialism does work, real socialism, not Venezuela.
We're anti-capitalism. We think socialism works. He's talking about socialism. And then when he's asked for an example, he brings up the example of the USSR, which is communist. That the communist model is the model for the first 4 years of the USSR. That's the model, which is communist. But he's talking about socialism. He's talking about socialism and communism interchangeably because they are the same thing. Socialism is a form of communism. Just like Trotsky's ideas when after Lenin dies, and that's what the brilliant book. If you haven't read Animal Farm, it is so brilliant because it just shows you so clearly how the Bolshevik Revolution took place, but how all of these revolutions since the Bolshevik Revolution will take place. And it's the same revolution. It's the same revolution, but that's the pigs in Animal Farm. Old Major is Lenin. Old Major leads the revolution over the Manor Farm. He leads the revolution and then he dies. And then Snowball is Trotsky, and Napoleon is Stalin. And Trotsky is there in the book after the revolution. He's trying to come up with new ideas of how we're going to make this communist system better. And he has his own ideas and that grow out of it. And Stalin has his own ideas. And Stalin's the one who trains the puppies that become the dogs, and they chase Trotsky, Snowball. It's all there in the book that socialism is just a form of communism, just like Trotsky's ideas were a form of communism. And communism has always been a work in progress. But it's the same thing. And that's why he's talking about it interchangeably. He says that we don't agree with capitalism. Socialism is the model, is what he says. That's the same thing that this guy says. I don't agree with capitalism. So democratic socialism, they started to put the democratic on. Democratic socialism is where he's talking about communism. So difference.
And fight together and create a better system. We're anti-capitalist. We think socialism does work, real socialism, not Venezuela, not Cuba, not any of that crap that they try to sell us as socialism. And we believe it would be a more humane system that will take care of most of all people's necessities.
Is there a country we can look to kind of model the socialism idea?
The only model would be Soviet Union the first 4 years. After that, it became a mess. Sadly.
So the USSR is the model of the socialism that he's talking about, which USSR was communism. And Karen Bass, who is the mayor of our second largest city on the West Coast, Los Angeles, is a communist. If Mondati is elected, likely to be elected in November, he's a communist. So the mayors of our two largest cities are communists. Are going to be communists. How did we get here, people? How did we get here? And the way that we got here is because the environment, the economic environment, the situation that we find ourselves in with the debt, with the austerity. There's going to be a lot of austerity in this new reconciliation bill that Republicans are getting ready to pass. That's why it's so controversial. The fact that we're dealing with inflation, high interest rates, all of those things are creating an environment that is making the message of communism more enticing here in the United States. And that's not, it's not by accident. It's by design. It's by design, what's going on. So this guy was on Meet the Press, this weekend, and Kristen Welker gave him every chance to walk back some of his more controversial, stances, and he doubled down on all of them. He didn't walk back anything. And he's been asked over and over again, about the fact that he calls himself a democratic socialism. And that's, the brand that he gives himself, much like Bernie Sanders calls himself a democratic socialist and says that he doesn't like capitalism. But every time that he defends his brand of democratic socialism, every time that he's asked about it and he defends it, and he did so in this interview, he references a quote from Martin Luther King. And this is the quote from Martin Luther King that he references. And he says it over and over again, that when people say, well, what is this, democratic socialism that you're talking about? He says, well, basically, and he uses Martin Luther King because he's basically saying, well, it can't be that bad if Martin Luther King believed in it. And he says, well, this is the quote that Martin Luther King said that, call it democracy, call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all God's children. Distribution of wealth. King, you can call it democracy, you can call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country. So he says, well, King said it. If King said it, then that means that it must be good. But let's look at some of this other stuff that King said about capitalism. Wait, what does King say about capitalism? I imagine you already know that I am a much more socialistic in my economic theory than capitalistic. King started out with capitalism started out with a noble and high motive, but like most human systems, it fell victim to the very thing that it was revolting against. So today, capitalism has outlived its usefulness. Capitalism has outlived its usefulness, is what King says. So it's a very good chance that King may have been a communist. Look at some of these other quotes. In a sense that you could say we're involved in a class struggle. King. Here's one of my favorites down here. The evils of capitalism are as real as the evils of militarism and the evils of racism. The evils of capitalism are as evil as... So was King a communist? And if King was a communist, you using this King quote to defend your ideology of democratic socialism doesn't really help you if King was a communist. A lot of people say King was a communist. So using King, I mean, I don't care that you know the King quotes and the Mandela quotes and all that stuff to make your brand of communism more appealing, it's still just communism. And it doesn't matter if King was selling it. It doesn't matter if it was Karen Bass. It doesn't matter if it's de Blasio. It doesn't matter if it's Bernie Sanders. It doesn't matter who it is. Doesn't matter who it is. It's still communism. Doesn't matter if it's Barack Obama. Barack Hussein Obama. I was saying in the last podcast that Barack Obama was friendly to capitalism, and he didn't, no one could accuse him of being a socialist because of the way he bailed out Wall Street. He bailed out GMAC. GMAC, that's why when he did the auto bailout, he was really bailing out GMAC because GMAC was writing mortgages and they weren't part of the bank bailout. So he bailed out GMAC. They're out now, Ally Financial. And so doing things like that, I said, well, he was pro-capitalism, but that's not really pro-capitalist, to do bank bailouts and bailing out companies that get themselves into, financial trouble because of their own speculative activity, like GMAC, like the other banks and everybody else. This guy went all around the country during 2008 as when he's running for president in the middle of a financial crisis, saying over and over again that I'm going to rebuild the American economy from the bottom up. That the economy is in shambles right now. It's pieces on the ground. And instead of top-down policy, I am going to rebuild the American economy from the bottom up, is what this guy says. Change you can believe in. Change you can believe in. But when he gets in, his chief economic advisor, Larry Summers, who was one of the people who set up the crash, his Treasury Secretary, Timothy Geithner, who was the president of the New York Fed and was also back in the Clinton administration who set up the crash, and many of his other economic advisors, they convinced him to stimulate the top, to bail out the top, and not rebuild the economy from the bottom up, like he said. They bailed out the top. They bailed out Wall Street. They bailed out the corporations, and the corporations in Wall Street recovered first, long before Main Street recovered. And it's safe to say that Main Street still hasn't recovered, which is another reason why the message of communism is more susceptible in the American politics right now, because honestly, the Main Street never recovered, but Wall Street recovered pretty fast, pretty rapidly after the crash. And of course, Bush did TARP. He signed TARP, but this guy was in the Senate. He voted for TARP. He voted for the bank bailout. He went on the Senate floor and he told everybody else that we need to vote for this bank bailout. That's not capitalism, people. The bank bailout was not capitalism. The bailout of GMAC was not capitalism. That's socialism, and it's corporate socialism. And so I was thinking about this. I was thinking, well, this guy was not a capitalist. He was a socialist through and through. But instead of using socialism to empower the Main Street, empower workers, he used socialism to empower the corporations and empower the banks. So it's a different form of socialism that the long-legged Mac Daddy imposed. And again, this is the reason that the Occupy Wall Street started. Occupy Wall Street started after the Great Recession. And this is what led into the campaign of Bernie Sanders, the Democratic Socialist, in 2016. The motive of Occupy Wall Street says right here, the motives for Occupy Wall Street largely resulted from public distrust in the private sector during the aftermath of the Great Recession in the United States. There were many particular points of interest leading up to the Occupy movement that angered populists and the left-wing groups. For instance, the 2008 bank bailout under George W. Bush administration utilized congressionally appropriated taxpayer funds to create the Troubled Assets Relief Program. So it was the bank bailout. It was the Great Recession. It was what happened with the crash in 2008 that started the Occupy Wall Street movement. And the Occupy Wall Street movement didn't start right away. It didn't start until 2011 because these left-wing activists that voted for Obama on change you can believe in, the reason that they didn't get out and start protesting right away is because they were waiting to see if Obama was going to actually bring the change that he ran on. Was he really going to rebuild the economy from the bottom up? Was he really going to hold these people accountable that held us hostage for billions of dollars because of their, fraud and what happened? People really don't even know what happened with the Great Recession and the crash in 2008. But these people, they're waiting to see, is Obama and what we voted on in 2008 to give these people this enormous amount of power, are they going to do something with it for us? And when they didn't, that's when they hit the streets. That's when they started to protest. Now, on the right wing, again, motivated by the same issues. By the same issues on the right wing, the Tea Party started right away. The Tea Party started right away, and they were motivated by the bank bailouts, by the fiscal problems that we were dealing with in the middle of this crash, and they started a right wing populist movement. That was the Tea Party, motivated by the same issues that the left wing populists were motivated by the bank bailout and the crash. And during this time, I remember saying that I wish these two sides could see that they are complaining about the same thing. And just like the Occupy Wall Street gave rise to the candidacy of Bernie Sanders in 2016, the Tea Party movement also gave rise to the candidacy of Donald Trump. They were complaining about the exact same things, and the fiscal irresponsibility, the bank bailout, and all of these other things that were going on. Tea Party starts right away. It takes the Occupy Wall Street movement a little time to get off the ground, but this is the beginning of creating the environment for communism and this message to be more accepted here in the United States by younger people. This book, The Creature from Jekyll Island, was written by G. Edward Griffin, and this is about the creation of the Federal Reserve System. Jekyll Island is an island off the coast of Georgia, I think, in the Atlantic, and all of these, elite bankers like J.P. Morgan and others went to the island, and they're the ones who created what would become the Federal Reserve system or banking system. And G. Edward Griffin, I have a few clips from him in this podcast. This is the first one I want to play of him talking about bank bailouts.
Buying their way out of these crises by creating money out of nothing and flooding it into the economy and diluting the purchasing power. They're not really solving the problem. What they're doing is pushing it off a little bit into the future and making it worse. And this is the solution that the
So what he's talking about is the bank bailout, TARP, the bailouts that Obama did of GMAC and AIG and all these other bailouts that we gave these major corporations, these banks, these insurance companies. G. Edward Griffin is saying all that does is push the problem down the road. For we don't have to deal with this for another decade, another 2 decades. And what you got to understand is that we're 2 decades down the road now. Or we're almost 2 decades down the road from 2008. We're over a decade and a half down the road from 2008 when they did the bank bailout. And what he's saying is that instead of dealing with the problem, we should have let everyone fail. That would have been capitalism. That what Obama did in 2008, what Bush did, that wasn't capitalism. And people looking at that and judging capitalism by what they did in that situation, by bailing out all of these banks, bailing out these insurance companies and GMAC, and bailing out all of these people that had made bad fiscal decisions for them, for their companies, that had participated in fraud, bailing these people out, not only created a moral hazard with it, which it did create a moral hazard, but it also is not capitalism. You are departing from capitalism when you are picking winners and losers. George Bush, Barack Obama. So if you're judging capitalism by what these guys did in 2008 and bailing out all of these corporations, and you're judging capitalism and saying capitalism is bad, we need communism, we need democratic socialism, you're not judging capitalism, because that's not capitalism. What they did was not capitalism. You're actually judging socialism and saying that we need more socialism is what you're doing. What these people did was not capitalism. And that's what G. Edgar Griffin is saying here now, is that they do the bailout to push the problem down the road so they don't have to deal with the backlash from the problem that they cause in the here and now. You push it down the road, and now we're down the road. Now we're dealing with it. That's why we're talking about austerity and this new reconciliation bill, and how much pain is going to cause us to raise the debt limit by $5 trillion. And we're dealing with these fiscal issues that are making communism more appealing, because we've pushed it down the road instead of letting these people fail, no matter what the problems we're going to cause. They held us hostage and says, you have to bail us out and spend this money to bail us out. No, everyone who made bad decisions, they should have failed back in 2008. There shouldn't have been any bailouts. We should have dealt with it back then and let the chips fall where they may. But they do the bailout. They create more money to do the bailout so they can push the problem down the road, so they're not dealing with the problem and the repercussions, the backlash that you get from the problem in the here and now, which we should have been dealing with back in 2008 and 2009. And Obama, after running on change, he helped cover it up. He helped push it down the road. The Federal Reserve gave him, in the middle of the Great Recession. It's funny because Jerome Powell won't raise the rate, a quarter of a percentage point. Give you a little inch of a raise, now, because he's afraid. And then back in during the Great Recession, when Obama comes in, unemployment was 10%. Everything was in shambles, and they cut rates to almost nothing for him. But they won't cut rates now for Trump. Purely political. But this guy, he helped after running on this platform of change and how change you're going to believe in. I'm going to rebuild the economy from the bottom up and all this stuff he ran on. And then he comes in and he helps Wall Street cover up. His DOJ is unable to arrest anyone for the fraud that was committed that brought us to that point. He doesn't rebuild the economy from the bottom up. He bails out the people on the top. And now we're dealing with the second Gilded Age, where the middle class is completely hollowed out and dissolved, and you have this huge wealth inequality. It's almost like they were creating the environment, creating the circumstances to make communism more appealing.
By buying their way out of these crises, by creating money out of nothing and flooding it into the economy and diluting the purchasing power, they're not really solving the problem. What they're doing is pushing it off a little bit into the future and making it worse. And this is the solution that the political leaders, not only of the United States, but of the whole world, this is the solution they are following. They've got an economic crisis, create more money. Of course, that's what created the crisis in the first place, but they don't care. As long as they're able to continue in power and look good and get reelected and live in the house on the hill, they really don't care about the future. It's the present that the political people think about.
So they don't care about the future. It's only the present that they care about, and they can kick the problem off down the road, push it off, then we can remain in power. And that's what these people did. We elected them and gave them, huge majorities. The House of Representatives, 60-seat majority in the Senate. Tons of power that the American electorate gave Democrats. Starting in 2006 is when Nancy Pelosi gets this gavel. And then we increase their margins in both houses, give them the White House in 2008, gave them all this power. And what they do with it? They bailed out corporations, bailed out the banks, didn't do anything for the middle class. This picture is taken after they forced through Obamacare, the ACA, without a single Republican vote. And you can see, again, the picture of Nancy Pelosi on her face, just drunk with power after we just pushed through this major piece of legislation that is going to completely, revamp the healthcare system in America. And is this a bill that championed the working class, the poor? Was this something that, the way that it was sold is that pre-existing conditions, that insurance companies aren't going to be able to deny you from pre-existing conditions anymore. Well, they're denying you for everything else. They're denying you for all kinds of other kinds of care. They make the decision. The insurance companies have all the power and decisions on what type of health care you receive. It's made by the insurance companies, because this law that Nancy Pelosi is sitting here all giddy about, drunk on power, didn't do anything to empower patients, to empower people. It empowered healthcare corporations. It empowered insurance companies. That's what it did. I played the clip of Stephen Brill before, who wrote the book Bitter Pill, and the Bitter Pill book and article in Time came out around the time where they're debating all of this. And the only thing that he's focused on in this book is how crazy the cost and the profits are of these healthcare corporations and these insurance corporations. And he's asked here in this interview, does Obamacare, does the ACA do anything to rein in the profits, to rein in the amount of money that these corporations are making and charging patients? Or does it just pay it from the government coffers? It's not only government coffers. Listen to what Steve Brill says here.
Stephen Brill has spent years investigating the healthcare industry and the creation of Obamacare. His new book is America's Bitter Pill: Money, Politics, Backroom Deals, and the Fight to Fix Our Broken Healthcare System. Stephen Brill is with us this morning. Stephen, good morning.
Good morning.
So the president promised that not only would healthcare be more accessible, but it would also be more affordable. Is that true?
Well, it's certainly more accessible to tens of millions of Americans, and it's more affordable to them because they're getting their insurance premiums paid for in large part by the government. So it's certainly not more affordable for the taxpayers. Mm-hmm. We basically have created a system where the good news is that many more people get the kind of health care you and I get. The bad news is that the taxpayers are paying for it, and they're paying the same exorbitant prices that make the system so unworkable.
But the main criticism about healthcare in America is that the costs are too high. Did Obamacare do anything to bring down the cost?
Everybody knew that the costs were the big problem. The costs being too high were the big problem. Does this look on Nancy Pelosi's face and how giddy all of these Democrats are after they force it through the ACA? Are they happy because they've done something to curb the costs and the profits of these corporations? No.
There are a couple of pilot projects. There are little things, but as I recount in the book, at every turn, when they tried to do something substantive to bring the cost down, such as control the price of drugs, deal with the exorbitant non-profit hospitals' high profits, they were stopped by the lobbyists. And the best test of all this, the
lobbyists for their corporations basically wrote the bill and told them, no, you can't cut our profits. You can't cut or curb the cost of you guys are going to pay the exact same cost and we're going to make the exact same profits. It's just going to be that the government now is paying for it. Not only the government, what we also learned, which again, this is a form of socialism, communism, whatever you call it, is that healthy people would pay for sick people. That's part of it. So if you eat good and you take care of yourself and you're healthy, then you're still going to be paying for the person that is unhealthy. That's socialism. That's communism. You eat good, you take care of yourself, you exercise, you're going to be paying for the person that eats junk, that sits in front of the TV all day, that doesn't pay for themselves. That's socialism. That's in the bill. So it doesn't take care of the high costs. And then Nancy Pelosi too. People think about, why do you think she's so happy here? Because she knows she's getting ready to make cash. I saw this online the other day, and it's hilarious. Nancy Pelosi is now worth $264 million after 36 years in Congress with a salary of $223.5 thousand a year. $223,000 a year is what she's made. And they've gotten a couple of raises in her 40 years in Congress, but she's been in Congress 40 years, worth $264 million. How do you think she makes all this money? People talk about, her and her husband's stocks. She knew exactly what stocks to buy. You're going to buy Sharp. You're going to buy Kaiser Permanente. You're going to buy Blue Shield. She knew what stocks to buy. She knew at this moment that they were empowering these healthcare companies and these medical device companies and all. She knew exactly what companies to invest in because she was empowering them, and that's what the ACA did. It wasn't. That's why you haven't CEOs of healthcare companies being killed and murdered, and everyone's celebrating the murderer because what they did. It didn't do anything to help working people, the people that elected them and gave them these huge majorities in Congress and gave them the White House. They didn't do anything with that power. They empowered the medical and companies and insurance companies, that their profits and even now people are talking about in this reconciliation bill that people are going to lose coverage. Coverage. What's coverage? Coverage isn't healthcare. Coverage is the insurance companies, and the insurance companies have too much power that was given to them by Nancy Pelosi and Barack Obama. I want you to listen to some of these doctors and their stories about, how the insurance companies, operate now under the ACA, Obamacare. And they told us, well, we got to pass this because they won't be able to deny pre-existing conditions. Won't be able to deny that. But they're denying all kinds of care. People are getting denied care on a daily basis.
Hi, I'm Dr. Jamie Seaman, a board-certified OBGYN, and this is what doctors are dealing with in 2025. So my patient needs a medication, a indicated medication for her condition. So I send the prescription to the commercial pharmacy. The pharmacist tells me that this medication needs a prior authorization and sends me a fax with a 1-800 number. The 1-800 number leads me to a pharmacy benefit manager that wants to ask my NPI, my date of birth, the patient's information, what kind of the prescription is, how long do they need it for.
This is ridiculous.
Only to tell me at the end of the phone call that I actually have to call the patient's insurance company to authorize the prior authorization for the needed medication. So I call the patient's insurance company, and once again I have to verify my information, the patient's information, the prescription information, what the patient needs it for. Only for the insurance company to tell me that this is not how they do prior authorizations. They're going to have to fax me some forms that I'm not allowed to do a prior authorization on the phone. So then the fax comes through and I fill it all out, the patient's information, my NPI, what the prescription is, how long they need it for, clinical documentation. And now we sit and wait and see if the powers that be think that the patient actually needs the medication.
The powers that be.
I went to school. I went to undergraduate medical school, 4 years of OBGYN residency, then went back and did integrative medicine fellowship, all for these people to dictate how my patient gets cared for. Please know that your healthcare providers are fighting for you day in and day out on things we don't get reimbursed for.
So the insurance company is the one dictating to the doctors how they're going to care for patients. And there are multiple stories like this, multiple stories.
Healthcare has, once again, disappointed me.
This sound is very low on this one, so I'm not going to play this one. But I mean, I have multiples to pick from. Here, listen to this one.
Nurse practitioner working in pain management. Listen to this. I just had insurance deny my request to start a patient on tramadol for treatment of their chronic pain. And the denial stated that they were denying it because they thought that I needed to try the patient on fentanyl first.
So they're denying you. Well, they won't be able to deny you pre-existing conditions for coverage. They won't be able to deny you pre-existing conditions for coverage, but they're denying you treatment? How does that make sense? How's that good for patients that, well, they won't deny me coverage and I can pay my premium to them, but if they want to deny me treatment, they can deny me treatment. Why didn't Obamacare fix that? Obamacare and the AOC, ACA was nothing more than a handout to the medical corporations, the insurance companies, the medical device companies. And that's why Nancy Pelosi's giddy here. Probably all these people, they know they're going to buy tons of stock in the medical corporations because medical corporations are getting ready to blow up after the ACA like they did. They're able to deny you tons of treatments. Maybe they won't deny you coverage, deny you from paying them premiums every month, but they'll be able to deny your doctor treatments and deny you medications. How's that help anyone? And again, it was nothing. The ACA was nothing more but socialism. Again, it was socialism. Jonathan Gruber admitted it. You guys even remember Jonathan Gruber? I think this guy was a CPA or something. He went out and he found this video of Jonathan Gruber bragging about the fact that they lied to the American people to get the ACA passed. You remember the ACA in the beginning had the individual mandate where they were going to mandate that you, not only were they giving the insurance companies all of these, new patients, they were going to demand that you pay for this insurance. And they were saying that it was, it was part of the Commerce Clause, that the portion of the Constitution that gave them the authority to demand that you pay for insurance was under the Commerce Clause. But they knew that it didn't fit under the Commerce Clause and that the Commerce Clause was not a valid, place to say the individual mandate where they got the authority from. They knew that it was a tax, but they hid the fact that it was a tax. They hit the fact in the bill. So he says right here, so the CBO scores it, as part of the Commerce Clause and not a tax so they can get it sold to the American people. And then when they go to the Supreme Court, John Roberts says, no, this is a tax. It's always been a tax.
It's just, you can't do it politically. You just literally cannot do it. Okay? Transparent financing, unless I have transparent financing, also transparent spending. I mean, this bill was written in a tortured way to make sure CBO did not score the mandate as taxes.
It was written in a tortured way. This was written in a deceptive way to make sure that the CBO does not score the mandate a tax, is what Jonathan Gruber said.
Financing, unless I have transparent financing, also transparent spending. I mean, this bill was written in a tortured way to make sure CBO did not score the mandate as taxes. If CBO scored the mandate as taxes, the bill dies. Okay, so it's written to do that. In terms of risk-rated subsidies, if you had a law which said healthy people are going to pay in, it made explicit that healthy people pay in and sick people get money, it would not have passed.
Healthy people are going to pay in for sick people. That's socialism. Healthy people that are healthy, that don't need this much coverage, they're going to have to pay higher premiums because they're paying for the sick person. The person that eats well, that takes care of himself, that goes to the gym, that person is going to pay higher premiums because he has to pay for the person that sits in front of the couch and eats junk food all day. That's what Jonathan Gruber is saying here. That's the ACA. That's the Obamacare bill.
In terms of risk-rated subsidies, if you had a law which said healthy people are going to pay in, it made explicit that healthy people pay in and sick people get money, it would not have passed. Okay, just like lack of transparency is a huge political advantage. And
Lack of transparency is a huge political advantage, is what this guy says.
It made explicit that healthy people pay and sick people get money, it would not have passed. Okay? Just like lack of transparency is a huge political advantage. And basically, call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever. But basically, that was really, really critical to get anything to pass. And
call it the stupidity of the American voter or whatever. You guys are stupid. And we wrote it this way because you people are stupid, and we knew that we can get it past you. We can get the tax past you. We can get the fact that it's socialism and healthy people are going to pay for sick people. We can get all of that passed for you. Obama did that. The long-legged Mac Daddy. It's socialism. It's socialism. So it shouldn't be a big surprise that now that we are, decade or more down the road, and there is an appetite for more socialism, for communism, and there's a huge marketplace, and there is, and the message of communism and socialism is resonating. It shouldn't be surprising to anyone. I want to show you this clip. This is the clip after this video of Jonathan Gruber. Again, it was found by some CPA or something. Wasn't even found by the media. This guy found this video, and then he put it out on the internet, and it went viral. And then Obama's asked about Jonathan Gruber, and this is what he says. Take a listen.
At your Burma town hall a couple of days ago, you tried to inspire young leaders by saying governments need to be held accountable and be responsive to the people. I wonder how you square that with your former advisor, Jonathan Gruber, claiming you were not transparent about the health law because, in his words, the American people, the voters, are stupid.
Stupid. We're stupid.
Did you mislead Americans about the taxes, about keeping your plan in order to get the bill passed?
No, I did not. I just heard about this. I get well briefed before I come out here. The fact that some advisor who never worked on our staff expressed an opinion that I completely disagree with in terms of the voters is no reflection on the actual process that was run. We had a year-long debate, Ed. I mean, go back and look. Stories.
So he says that he's some staffer. I don't know who he is. And then this video came out of Obama at the Brookings Institute, and he knew exactly who Jonathan Gruber is. Take a listen.
You've already drawn some of the brightest minds from academia and policy circles. Many of them I've stolen ideas from liberally. People ranging from Robert Gordon to Austin Goolsbee, John Gruber. I've stolen his ideas. John Gruber. He knows exactly who John Gruber is. John Gruber is the guy who said the stupidity of the American people, that we wrote this bill in a tortured way to get it over on the American people, get this socialism over on the American people. It's sad. It's sad. So what they're doing, people, is they're creating, this is intentional. They're creating an environment, an economic situation where they are making communism more appealing and more susceptible to Americans, particularly younger Americans. A lot of it's going on in the schools where they're being indoctrinated with socialist communism, communist ideas in grade school, and especially in the college. But what this is nothing more than communism, good old-fashioned communism. And communism is based on conflict theory. Conflict theory is the theory behind communism. I have this clip. I just want you to listen to a little bit about what conflict theory is. Conflict theory is the social theory behind communism. Take a listen.
Conflict theory is a way of studying society that focuses on the inequalities of different groups in a society. It is based on the ideas of Karl Marx from the 19th century, who believed a society evolved through several stages, the most important of which were feudalism, capitalism, and finally socialism. 19th century Europe was a capitalist society, where the rich upper class, called the bourgeoisie, were a minority of the population, and the poor lower class, called the proletariat, were the majority. Now, you might think that the majority would have more sway over the society, but it was actually the bourgeoisie that had the power. They owned the factories that produced everything people needed, and they sold what they produced to earn a living. The proletariat only had their labor to sell to make a living, and they were dependent on the factory owners to get paid. But this wasn't just a one-sided dependence. The factory owners were also dependent on the workers to work in the factories, though they would never admit it because they would lose some of their power. There was a significant economic inequality between the factory owners and the workers. It was this economic inequality that Marx believed would fuel a change in society. As the working class realized they were being exploited, they would unite to create a class consciousness. This class consciousness is kind of like getting everyone on the same wavelength so they can be stronger and overthrow the capitalist status quo. Marx created a model which proposed that a society where one group exploited another group economically would actually contain the seeds of its own destruction. The existing generally accepted state, or thesis, of a society would cause the formation of a reaction, or antithesis, that opposed the accepted state. In a capitalist society, the accepted thesis was that the bourgeoisie ran the factories, while the working class provided the labor. The desire of the working class to change the way things were was the antithesis. The thesis and antithesis can't exist together peacefully. One side is quite happy with the status quo and wants to leave things the way they are. The other side is looking for change because they really aren't so happy with the current state of things.
I want you to understand, too, that in Marxism, there's only the bourgeoisie and the proletariat. There's no middle class. There's no middle. It's the workers and the owners who own the means of production and the workers that work at the factories. That is the only system. So in eliminating the middle class in this country, dissolving the middle class in this country, you're creating a situation where you have more rich and wealthy and more poor workers, and there's no buffer class in between. It's just the haves and the have-nots, the bourgeoisie and the proletariat, the workers and the owners. And what was going on in the 1980s, because of Reaganomics, because of where we were during this period, which I believe was Pax Americana, was we had a thriving middle class. That's why the messaging of capitalism or the messaging of communism or socialism would have never resonated back in the 1980s, back in the 1990s, because we had a thriving middle class. But if you create a situation where you are dissolving the middle class and you have only the haves and the have-nots, then the message of communism resonates more. It becomes more susceptible.
The struggle between the two sides would eventually lead to a compromise, or a synthesis of the two, resolving the tension between them by creating a new state. Perhaps the synthesis here is that members of the working class begin to take on managerial positions.
Middle class.
The few workers who become managers might create a new middle class that has even more power than the factory owners themselves. This synthesis of thesis and antithesis would eventually become a new thesis in its own right, and begin the process of creating its opposite once again.
So, the bourgeoisie own the means of production. The worker, the proletariat are always working to overthrow the bourgeoisie. That's conflict theory. That's Marxism. That's what they're trying to create. I have this last clip of Zoran Mandani that just went viral over the last couple of days, where he's talking about arresting the means of production. This is communist rhetoric, true and blue, communist rhetoric. Take a listen.
What the purpose is about this entire project, it's not simply to raise class consciousness, but to win socialism. And obviously raising class consciousness is a critical part of that. But making sure that we have candidates that both understand that and are willing to put that forward at every which moment that they have, at every which opportunity that they're given. We have to continue to elect more socialists, and we have to ensure that we are unapologetic about our socialism. There are also other issues that we firmly believe in, whether it's BDS, right, or whether it's the end goal of seizing the means of production, where we do not have the same level of support.
So seizing the means of production is the end goal, is what he says. And how do we get here, people? How do we get here? And is there any turning back is the question. Hope you guys have a great 4th of July, and I will see you next Monday. Have a great week.